Welcome to Spiritual Psychology. My name's Renee McKenna. I'm a therapist and shamanic healer. And today I want to talk about intellect and intuition, or what I tend to call masculine and feminine, these two co-creative forces in the universe. The masculine or intellectual principle is rational, it's goal-oriented, purpose-driven. It's very structural, grounded in the material world, form. The masculine principle designs the house, gathers the material, and builds the structure, and perhaps defends it. The feminine principle, or the intuitive, is what makes that house a home. The intuitive or feminine is relational, experiential, emotional. It's the current of love, creativity, connectedness, desire. The masculine builds the house, and the feminine makes it a home. I had a really amazing experience this week. I got to spend the entire week on a virtual retreat with my best friend and Tom Campbell. Tom's a physicist who's developed what he calls my big theory of everything. We were originally supposed to go and spend the week in Nashville, but of course it was canceled because of COVID. And so it ended up being a virtual retreat instead with about 40 people from all over the world. And we spent 10 hours every day this week. Well, I played hooky quite a lot, but there was 10 hours every day this week. I'm a really crappy retreat attendee. My attention span for intellectual information is kind of limited, which is kind of funny considering that's the topic of this podcast. But anyway, Astrid, my buddy, attended every single session, and we get to spend the whole week doing all these amazing mind-expanding and intuition-expanding experiments. And I got to do more spiritual practice this week than I have in ages. It's my favorite thing to do. It was so great. I'm going to put some links to Tom Campbell's work in the show notes. He has extensive YouTube videos. And the acronym My Big Theory, they've turned into MBT. So Tom Campbell, MBT. He has a really dry and wonderful sense of humor. He's just a lovely person. And the name of his seminal work is My Big Toe. MBT standing for My Big Toe. And because of the nature of this retreat, there was a lot of Q&A, and I got to have quite a few discussions with Tom about our different perspectives on exactly the same thing. And the thing we got to talk about was what drives the universe. And from Tom Campbell's perspective, the force of evolution drives the universe. And in Tom's own words, not only is he a white male, but he's a white male physicist, which is like the worst kind. That's what he said. Because he's got this enormous brain and tremendous capacity for holding information and a voracious hunger for knowledge and understanding. Highly intellectual. The great thing about Tom is that he's also highly intuitive. And the work of MBT is a really unique and accessible approach to grasping the interrelationship and the interplay between intellect and intuition. Part of the reason I'm a crappy lecture listener is because I'm not that interested in intellectual information. I'm mostly interested in the intuitive. You know, we live in a plane of duality, day and night, constructive, destructive, intellect and intuition. And it's not an either or, it's a both and. And the interplay of dualistic forces actually brings us to unification, brings us to oneness. When a man and a woman get together in a very particular and wonderful way, new life is formed. And that's instructive. As humans, we have both our intellect and our intuition, and together they make us a whole being. But the balance of how they interact with each other is very important. And from my own perspective, and Tom Campbell and I agree on this, the intuition is actually primary and more important. And optimally, the intellect serves the intuition rather than the other way around. That our intuitive self, our non-rational self, our energetic being self, our emotional, relational, connected self, that's who we really are. And the intellect, the ego, optimally is like the car that drives the authentic self around in the world. That our thinking mind is a tool, that our narratives about who we are and our personality self, those are structures that we need to be able to interact with others and move around in the world in an effective, cohesive way. But they often contain a lot of fear. They hold old, outdated narratives about ourselves and others. And certainly the amazing abilities of our prefrontal cortex to calculate and understand and conceptualize, communicate, it's amazing, but it's incredibly limited. And it knows that. Unfortunately, in our scientific, very materially based culture, the intuitive self is mistrusted, misunderstood, underdeveloped in most people. It's considered secondary rather than primary. And from my experience, the intuitive self that's grounded in the earth, that's connected to source, that has a felt experience of the life energy that flows in and through all things, is capable of tapping into incredible information. And that's a lot of what we did this week. Tom Campbell's taken a lot of spiritual and esoteric traditions and really turned them into science. He doesn't use the word God or the life force at all. He talks about the larger consciousness system, the LCS, he calls it, and is fascinated by the logic of this giant computing structure that loves and cares for us. Because we're all a part of it, we have incredibly easy access to that system and all of the information that it wants to offer us. So I experimented with a lot of new phenomenon this week. Remote viewing, out-of-body experiences, gathering information from the past and the future, probabilities, because every moment is a probability calculation. And with our intent, we can change the outcome of that probability because we're part of the system and we can input new data into it. Very interesting. The past and future data system, known in New Age circles as the Akashic Records, something I've never looked into before. I'm actually not that interested in the past and the future. I'm mostly interested in the now. But it was interesting, and we experimented with getting verifiable evidence that we could double check to see if what was happening was actually right. We worked with some telepathic communication, which I do a lot. It was great. I actually spent some time talking to my ancestors, talking to my higher self of my teenagers, conversations I can't have in ordinary reality. Tremendous love and gratitude in that space. And one of the things I'm really excited about this week, because I work with those principles a lot, and the idea of masculine and feminine is pretty controversial and lit up these days. And it can really throw people off. And the whole purpose of communicating is getting ideas across. So I love getting new, more effective ways of communicating ideas. And so these terms, intellect and intuition, are totally synonyms for me for the masculine and the feminine. And as intellectual and evidence-based and scientific as a lot of the information that came through this week was, I was really thrilled to come to understand that there was a shared understanding that optimally we root in our intuition, and the intellect supports that. The intellect allows us to show up, to put words to things. It allows us to have a healthy ego self that interacts with other people so that we can actually have our interactions. You could understand intellect or the masculine even as the form of our body, the material crystallization of who we are at this moment, what Tom Campbell calls our IUC, our individual unit of consciousness. That's what each person is. We're each an individual unit of consciousness. And the consciousness is our authentic self, the feminine principle, the intuitive that's connected to the infinite field of which we're all a part. And our body self, our ego, our personality, our intellect is the house. It's the masculine principle that allows us to move our consciousness around in an effective way so we can bump into or rub up against or run away from other units of consciousness and have an experience. In the tantric cosmology of Hinduism, these are the principles of Shiva and Shakti, and the two are actually one. They're the cosmic couple, the divine union of energy and the generative force and form and understanding. So how would it be to root yourself in your intuition first in your experience, your relationality, your body-centered, present, felt awareness. And that the intellect could support that, bring it into words, calculate what you should do with that information. So who's driving the bus in your life? Your intellect or your intuition? You might experiment with changing drivers and see what happens. Let me know how it works out for you. Blessings on your path. Until we meet again, this is Renee LaValle McKenna for Spiritual Psychology.